You know that moment when your salary finally hits your account, and for a few seconds, everything feels under control? Like maybe this time it's different. Maybe this time you're finally ahead. But then, almost quietly, things start pulling that money away. Rent, bills, food, subscriptions, unexpected expenses, and before you even realize it, you're right back where you started. It's not dramatic. It's not sudden. It just happens. And what's frustrating is that this doesn't just happen once. It repeats every single month. No matter how careful you try to be, no matter how much you plan, it feels like you're stuck in a loop you can't break. So the question is, why does this cycle feel so permanent? And more importantly, what actually happens when it finally breaks? Most people believe the answer is simple. They think the problem is income. If I just made more money, everything would be fine. And on the surface, that sounds logical. Because when you're struggling financially, more money feels like the obvious solution. But the reality is a lot more complicated than that. Because there are people earning significantly more than you right now who feel exactly the same way. They still hesitate before spending. They still feel pressure every month. They still live with that quiet anxiety in the background, like one wrong move could set them back. So if more money doesn't fix the problem, then what does? This is where things start to get interesting, because escaping the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle isn't just about numbers. It's not just about income or expenses. It's about a shift, a subtle, almost invisible transition that changes how your entire financial life works. And the strange part is, most people go through this shift without even realizing it. There's a phase that exists between being broke and being financially stable. A phase where you're no longer constantly stressed, but you're not fully secure either. You're not drowning anymore, but you're not exactly relaxed. And this is where the real transformation begins. Imagine standing in water that's just high enough to reach your mouth. You're not completely underwater, but you can't relax either. Every second, you're focused on staying above the surface. You can't think clearly. You can't plan ahead. You're just trying to get through the moment. Now imagine that water level drops just a little. Not completely. Just enough so you can breathe without struggling. Suddenly, everything changes. You're not panicking anymore. You can think. You can look around. You can actually decide what to do next. That small difference, that tiny gap, is what escaping paycheck to paycheck really feels like. But erase the part almost nobody talks about. Most people reach this point, and then lose it. Not because they're careless. Not because they're irresponsible. But because they don't recognize what's happening. They think they've made it, even though they've only just created a small amount of breathing room. And instead of protecting that space, they slowly erase it. They start spending a little more, upgrading slightly, making decisions that feel small in the moment but add up over time. A better phone, more convenience, slightly higher lifestyle expectations. Nothing extreme, nothing reckless, just small shifts that feel completely justified. And that's exactly how the cycle resets, because those small upgrades turn into fixed expenses. They become normal, expected, necessary, and before long, the gap disappears. The breathing room is gone, and they're right back where they started, working just to keep up. This is why escaping the cycle isn't just about earning more. It's about learning how to handle the moment when things start getting better. Because that moment is fragile. It's unstable. And if you don't understand it, you'll lose it without even realizing what happened. And erase where things get even more interesting. Because once you've experienced even a small amount of financial breathing room, going back feels worse than never having it at all. You notice the stress more. You feel the pressure more. You become aware of how unstable things really are. But that discomfort isn't a bad thing. It's actually a signal. It means something inside you has changed. You're no longer okay with just surviving. You've seen what it feels like to have even a little bit of control, and now you want more of it. This is where the real shift begins. Not in your bank account, but in your thinking. Because once you've experienced even a small amount of control, your perspective starts to change. You stop looking at money as something that constantly disappears, and start seeing it as something you can actually direct. Before this point, every financial decision feels reactive. You spend because you have to. You save only when there's something left. You make choices based on urgency, not strategy. But now something subtle happens. You begin to pause, to think, to question whether each decision is actually moving you forward or quietly pulling you back. And that pause is more powerful than it looks, because for the first time, you're not just asking, "Can I afford this?" You're asking a completely different question. What is this costing me long term? And that single shift changes everything. Because now, money isn't just about the present moment, it's about the future you're building. Think about something as simple as a monthly expense. Before, it might have felt small, almost irrelevant. But now you start seeing it differently. You start realizing that small, repeated decisions aren't actually small. They compound. They stack. They quietly shape your entire financial direction. And once you see that, it's impossible to unsee it. Because suddenly your focus shifts away from tiny, one-time purchases and toward the bigger decisions that actually define your life. Where you live, what you commit to, how you spend your time. These things start to matter more than ever before. At first, this can feel overwhelming. Because now you're aware. You see the patterns. You understand the consequences. And with that awareness comes responsibility. You realize that your situation isn't just happening to you. You're actively shaping it. And that realization can either scare you or empower you, because this is the moment where you stop being someone who reacts to money and start becoming someone who controls it. Not perfectly, not instantly, but intentionally. You begin making decisions with purpose instead of pressure. You stop chasing short-term relief. You stop looking for quick fixes. And instead, you start thinking in terms of stability, consistency, progress. You become less interested in feeling rich for a moment and more focused on becoming secure over time. This shows up in ways you might not expect. You start turning down things you would have said yes to before, not because you can't afford them, but because you understand what they cost beyond money. Time, energy, opportunity, and slowly your priorities begin to shift. You also begin to notice something else. People around you are still stuck in the same cycle, but now you can see why. It's not just about how much they earn. It's how they think, how they decide, how they respond when things start getting better. And once you see the pattern, you can't ignore it. But hey, race, the important part, this stage is still fragile. You haven't fully escaped yet. You've just stepped out of survival mode. And that means you're in a transition phase. A phase where your habits are still forming and your discipline is still being tested. And this is exactly where most people slip. Not at the beginning when things are obviously difficult, but in the middle when things start to feel easier. Because that's when discipline fades. That's when focus drops. That's when people assume they've already won. So let me ask you something. What do you think happens next? Once you've stepped out of survival mode, once you've created that small gap, once you've started thinking differently, what actually determines whether you move forward or fall back? It's not luck. It's not timing. And it's definitely not income alone. It comes down to one thing: whether you protect the progress you've made or slowly give it back. Because at this stage, your biggest enemy isn't being broke anymore. It's comfort. That feeling that things are good enough. That subtle voice that tells you it's okay to relax, to loosen up, to reward yourself just a little more than you should. And that voice, that's what pulls most people back. Not all at once. Not in a way that feels like a mistake. But gradually, quietly, through decisions that feel harmless in the moment. Because the truth is, nobody wakes up and decides to go backwards. It just happens. One small step at a time. This is where the difference starts to become clear. Because the people who actually move forward from this stage, they don't just earn more. They think differently about what they already have. They understand that progress isn't about speed. It's about direction. They become protective. Not in a fearful way, but in a focused way. They start treating their progress like something valuable. Something that needs to be maintained. Because they've experienced what it feels like to not have it. So instead of asking, "What can I afford right now?" they ask, "What supports the life I'm trying to build?" And that question filters everything. Every expense, every decision, every opportunity. It creates clarity where there used to be confusion. And once that clarity shows up, everything gets simpler, because now you're not constantly starting over. You're building on top of what you already have. Small wins start stacking. Progress becomes visible. And for the first time, it feels like your effort is actually moving you forward instead of just keeping you in place. And this is the moment where something shifts internally. Not just financially, but emotionally. The stress that used to sit in the background starts fading. That constant pressure begins to loosen. And in its place, you feel something different. Control. Not perfect control, but enough to change everything. Because now, when something unexpected happens, it doesn't break you. It doesn't reset your progress. It becomes something you handle, not something you fear. And that difference is what separates surviving from building. At this point, you're no longer the person who was stuck in that cycle. You don't think the same way. You don't make decisions the same way. You don't see money the same way. You've crossed into a completely different mindset, one where stability isn't temporary. It's intentional. And the most powerful part? This didn't happen because of one big moment. It didn't come from a sudden breakthrough. It came from small decisions, repeated over time, that slowly changed the direction of your life. Escaping paycheck to paycheck isn't about reaching a number. It's about reaching a point where your life stops feeling fragile, where you're no longer one mistake away from starting over, where your progress finally feels real. Because in the end, it was never just about money. It was about becoming the kind of person who doesn't lose control once they gain it.